My wife is 52 and I am 55. My wife is a retired school teacher and I am a data systems analyst. Well, after spending 2 decades of my life with my wife, I started noticing this subtle shift in her behavior. It wasn't anything glaringly obvious, mind you, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that something was off. It was like I was seeing a different side of her, one I hadn't been privy to in our 20 years of wedded bliss. You see, we had this tradition of embarking on weekend getaways. Just the two of us escaping from the hustle and bustle and enjoying the quiet serenity together. But as of late, she seemed less and less interested in these excursions. It was almost as if she was finding more joy in the company of her new friends, a gaggle of retired ladies she'd stumbled upon in some Facebook group. Now, don't get me wrong. I was glad she had friends to spend time with, especially since she retired from her teaching job. But it was the frequency of these hangouts and the enthusiasm she showed for them that made me feel. Well, sidelined. Then there was her newfound fascination with TikTok. Lord knows how many hours she'd spend on that app on her new iPhone. The one I gifted her for our anniversary. It was as if she was living in a whole new world, one that I wasn't a part of. She'd be there glued to her screen, scrolling through an endless sea of videos, giggling at some, frowning at others and sometimes even blushing. I'd ask her what was so funny, and she just waved me off, telling me I wouldn't understand. I couldn't help but feel a pang of exclusion. It was like we were slowly drifting apart, like two boats that had lost sight of each other in the vast expanse of an ocean. I lay there in bed next to her, watching her engrossed in her iPhone. And I wonder what happened to us? What happened to the woman who used to share every little thing with me? I didn't want to believe anything was seriously wrong. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was just enjoying her retirement and the freedom that came with it. But deep down, I was beginning to worry. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was not right. Something that she wasn't telling me. So I decided to take a closer look at the situation. You know, like I do with the systems I analyze at work. I mean, here's the thing, I didn't want to probe or invade her privacy. I just wanted to understand what was happening. The guy's got a right to know if his marriage is on the rocks, doesn't he? She go out on these so-called girls' nights and return late sometimes. Well, past midnight, once she was even going for an entire weekend. When I asked her where she'd been, she just told me she'd had his sleepover at one of her friends' places. I found it odd but didn't want to stir the pot by asking too many questions. The tipping point came when she started getting all these calls and texts. At odd hours, there was always a new excuse. It was a friend from the Facebook group or some interesting TikTok creator she was following. But the whispers, the secretive smiles, the hurried hang-ups. When I walked into the room, it all felt a bit too suspicious. It was as if she was hiding something and I was determined to find out what it was. One day when she was out with her friends again, she forgot her phone. I decided to check her iPhone. I felt guilty, I admit, but the nagging suspicion was eating me up. I had to know what was going on. I picked up her phone, my heart pounding in my chest. She left it on the table unlocked. It was as if fate was giving me a chance to uncover the truth. My palms were sweaty as I opened her messages. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. At first, just usual chats with her friends, some forwarded jokes, some TikTok videos, links. But then as I kept scrolling, I stumbled upon a name. I didn't recognize. The messages were flirtatious. Intimate. What I saw started making me angry. My hands shook as I scrolled through the endless thread of text. Each one, a painful stab in my heart. My mind was reeling. My heart pounding. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Had my wife of 20 years been cheating on me all this while? Was our marriage a lie? I felt a mixture of anger and betrayal. But above all, I felt a deep sense of loss, like I was watching the life I knew crumbled before my very eyes after I found those messages on her iPhone. Well, I felt like a wreck. I didn't know what to do, who to talk to or how to confront her. This wasn't something I was prepared for. No one is, I guess. I mean, how could you? It felt like I'd been sucker, punched, left, reeling and gasping for air. Anyway, I decided I had to keep my cool. Couldn't let her know what I discovered. Not yet. I needed to be sure to gather more evidence. I couldn't just accuse her based on some 40 messages. Could I? No. I had to be absolutely sure before I confronted her. So I started my own little investigation. Using my skills as a data systems analyst, I became more observant, started noting her behavior, her habits, her routine, anything that seemed awful out of the ordinary. I jotted it down. It was painful to say the least, watching the woman you love, suspecting her of betrayal. It was like living in a nightmare, but I had to do it. She continued going out with her girlfriends, coming back late, sometimes even spending the weekend away. Every time she was away, I feel a twinge of anxiety, wondering if she was with him. I kept an eye on her phone usage. She was always on TikTok, watching and sharing videos. I didn't think much of it initially. But then I started noticing how secretive she'd become about her phone. She'd quickly turn off the screen when I walked into the room or take calls in the other room. It was clear she was hiding something. And the more I observed, the more convinced I became that my wife was having an affair. It was a painful realization, but I had to face the truth. My marriage was falling apart and I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. After weeks of observing, the hard evidence was all there. My wife, the woman I pledged my life to, was having an affair, but my gut was telling me to confront her. I wrestled with it. I mean, should I confront her or should I hire a private investigator? The former felt right. But the latter, well, it seemed more logical. I had to be smart about this. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. So I got online, started looking up private investigators in our area. I was hesitant. I mean, it felt like I was crossing a line, invading her privacy. But then I had to remind myself she crossed the line first when she decided to cheat. Anyway, I got a list of potential investigators and began making some calls. I finally decided on this one guy who used to work in law enforcement. He seemed professional and understood the delicacy of the situation. I hired him, gave him all the information he needed. He assured me he'd handled everything discreetly. He also told me to carry on as if everything was normal, to not tip her off. I felt a sense of relief knowing that I was taking steps to find out the truth. At the same time, I was terrified of what he might uncover, but I had to know I had to be sure. So while the investigator did his thing, I carried on pretending everything was fine. Went inside. Well, I was a mess. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do for my sanity, for closure, for the truth. During this time, I'd also started preparing for the worst. I mean, if my worst fears were confirmed, I knew I'd have to consider divorce. It was a harsh reality, but I had to face it. I started discreetly organizing my finances, making sure I was in a position to handle any legal fees and expenses that might come up. I opened up a separate bank account, transferred some of my savings there. I also began researching divorce laws in our state. It was a depressing task, but a necessary one. I had to know what I'd be up against if it came to that. All this while I kept up appearances, acting as if everything was normal. While inside, I was planning for a possible end to our marriage. It was a strange, hollow feeling. After a week, the private investigator came through with some definitive evidence. My heart sank when he confirmed my worst fears. My wife was indeed cheating on me. I felt a mix of emotions. I was angry, devastated, and utterly betrayed. I wasn't going crazy. My gut was right all along. The investigator handed me a report with photos and everything. It was painful to look at, but it was the cold, hard proof I needed. I thanked the investigator for his work, paid him, and then, well, I was left to deal with this newfound reality. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was living a double life. And now I had to confront her. When the moment came to confront my wife, I felt a strange calmness. Maybe it was because I had mentally prepared myself, or maybe it was just numbness. I called her into the living room, sat her down and handed her the investigator's report. She was surprised. Then she looked at the evidence and then silence. She didn't deny it. She tried to justify her actions, saying she wasn't feeling fulfilled, that she needed something more. It was as if she was blaming me for her infidelity. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my cool. I told her that we could have talked about her feelings, that cheating was not the answer. She didn't have much to say after that. I guess she didn't expect to be caught. Well, I guess she thought wrong after the confrontation. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings. It was a tough process. I got myself a good attorney, someone who was sympathetic and understanding. We filed for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. She didn't put up a fight, maybe because she knew she was in the wrong, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Our divorce was finalized after a few months. It was a relief to finally close that chapter of my life. It was painful. Yes. But it was also a chance for a fresh start. I got to keep the house. Thankfully, she didn't want the house. That's what she told the judge. She ended up moving out, leaving me to pick up the pieces of what was once our life together in the aftermath of the divorce. I felt a sense of freedom, a chance to start over, but also a deep sense of loss. We have been together for 20 years. That's a long time. I had to learn to navigate life on my own. I threw myself into my work and started hitting the gym more at my age. I am still making some decent gains. It was a welcome to action from the emptiness of the house. I also started to spend more time with my friends. They were incredibly supportive, helping me through the tough times. I won't lie. It was hard. There were moments of intense loneliness. There were nights when I missed her despite everything, but I knew that I deserved better, and that thought kept me going. Eventually I started to heal the pain lesson, and I found myself looking forward to the future rather than dwelling on the past. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that trust is precious, and once broken, it's hard to rebuild. I learned that it's important to communicate, to not let feelings fester. Most importantly, I learned that I could survive, that I could come out of this stronger. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that I'm ready for it. I'm stronger than I ever knew, as I have learned by going to different forums trying to find what I could have done to try and save my marriage. There was nothing I could have done. She was checked out by advice. A loving marriage requires two people.